Hello. Some people ask me if we have deaf nuns. And the answer to that is yes, but there are very few. Years and years ago, we had more, but after they've died off, the numbers have dwindled. Today's interview is with Sister Kathleen Shapani. She's from Philadelphia, and I didn't interview her to find out about her. I interviewed her to have her share a story about a nun named Sister Patricia Hughes, who passed away years ago, but was one of the first deaf nuns in the United States. So I hope you enjoy the vlog. Hello, sister. Could you share with us your name, where you're from? Hello, I am Sister Kathleen Shapani. I'm from Philadelphia, which is where I was raised, and I entered religious life in 1973, the Sisters of Immaculate Heart of Mary, and I've worked here in Philadelphia with the deaf community ever since. We know that Philadelphia, years and years ago, had a deaf nun by the name of Sister Patricia Hughes, that maybe she was the first deaf nun here in the U.S. Could you tell us a little bit about her, where she was born, what her name was before she entered religious life? Way back in 1857, a woman by the name of Bridget Hughes was born. She grew up about 3 hours from Philadelphia in a town called Coaldale. That whole region, about 3 hours from Philadelphia, is the coal mining area. And she was born into a family in that area and grew up as a hearing child until the age of 7, when she was struck ill with the black flu. As a result, she ended up deaf at the age of 7. From that time on, her parents looked for a school where they could send her. They wanted her to go to Philadelphia, what is now called the Pennsylvania School for the Deaf, which back then was called the Pennsylvania Institute for the Deaf. How did she get her calling to become a nun? How did she join the order? Because back then, people probably wouldn't have wanted to have a deaf nun. Well, she decided to become a nun, and the story is quite interesting. When she was younger, probably around the age of 4 or 5, she told her parents that she wanted to become a nun, that she wanted to devote her life to God. She was only 4. But then at age 7, she got sick and became deaf and thought that that would never happen. She prayed about it a lot. She went to the Philadelphia School for the Deaf, and when she was there, one of her family friends, who himself was a priest, came to visit. And he noticed that there were no religious classes at the School for the Deaf. So Bridget had no place to go. So the priest took it upon himself to come to the School for the Deaf. His name was Father Brennan. So he would come every week for Mass and for religious classes. So he used Bridget to kind of assist him in teaching others religion and how to teach deaf kids. And they did that using sign language. So really it was the beginning of the religious ed program at the Pennsylvania School for the Deaf. When she graduated, she went back to her hometown of Coaldale and she told her priest that she wanted to become a nun. But they couldn't figure out how that was going to happen because there weren't any orders that signed. They asked the bishop. The bishop was from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and he checked and thought that maybe she'd be able to go to Canada and join an order there, because there was a Catholic school for the deaf and the sisters knew sign language. Or the other option might be that she could go to Indiana. The bishop knew a sister there who signed. One of the priests told Bridget to begin praying to St. Joseph. So she prayed 9 days, a novena. And shortly after that, a bishop from Philadelphia heard that she'd wanted to become a nun. He wrote a letter and sent it and told her to come to Philadelphia, and he would find some sisters in Philadelphia that he knew that knew French Sign Language, and they would help her to become a nun. So she traveled the 3 hours back to Philadelphia to join that community called the Sisters of St. Joseph. Now, it's funny that she had been praying to St. Joseph, asking him for help, and then she ends up joining the Sisters of St. Joseph's. They welcome her, and she started to study to become a nun. And that was in 1880. Another thing that they wrote about her was that in 1881, along with another sister of St. Joseph, and remember, Bridget hadn't taken her vows yet, the two of them started teaching after school at the Philadelphia School for the Deaf, where they would line the kids up and take them to the cathedral for religious classes. As a nun, what was her main ministry? We see from the church newsletter that her name is mentioned as having religious education classes for the deaf. First at the cathedral, and at the school right next door, which was the Philadelphia School for the Deaf. It was on Pine Street. And she would walk the kids several blocks. First there were 16 kids, or 17 kids when it was mentioned. And then the second time it's mentioned in the newsletter, there were 25 kids that had joined. A year later, there were 3 other locations where they had classes for the deaf. And the nuns named her Sister Patricia. And it's interesting because the Sisters of St. Joseph came to Philadelphia in 1846. Some of them did know sign language, however, it was French Sign Language, so they didn't really use it here. It seems that when she joined the order, they started practicing sign language and started having classes for the deaf in Philadelphia, and that spread. Another interesting thing that began to happen is they began to offer classes for religious ed, and deaf Catholic adults began to come to those meetings. And so together the sisters started choosing priests to come and give retreats to them. There was a big Catholic group, and it seems around that time that with her influence it developed, and it really was her work teaching religious education. But it seemed that she was involved with deaf adults also. How old was she when she passed away? When she became a nun, she was, I think, 23. She lived until she was 43 years old. However, one Christmas she became very, very ill with pneumonia and she suddenly passed away. And she was only 43. That was in 1910. Now, another interesting thing, the bishop at the cathedral, his name was John Ryan, and he became friends with Sister Patricia. It seems that she was a good seamstress as well, so she made some of his priest vestments. And she was talking with him about the deaf and saying that she was, always pleading to have some religious education classes for the deaf, and that they really needed a deaf Catholic school in Philadelphia. So she influenced him to purchase some property in order for them to be able to set up the first school for the deaf in Philadelphia. Now, remember, she died in 1910. However, the bishop also died in 1910. Two years after he passed, the school opened, and they used the land that Bishop Ryan had purchased. So his predecessor named the school for him. Really, it should have been named for Sister Patricia. What do you think her legacy is today? Well, when I read her story, I find it very inspiring. I think it's because she saw the vision of the future and what was possible, and she continued to pray for that. The other thing is that she was always friendly. People said that she had very good rapport with the bishop, with the other sisters, and also with other people in Philadelphia. So she had some power and influence. Without her influence, I know that we wouldn't have a Catholic school in Philadelphia for the deaf. It also seems that there were many other deaf organizations set up around that time as well, through her influence. So when she died, people wrote about her in the Catholic Deaf newspaper, and they named her the patron of the deaf, and I really feel that she was the patron for deaf people. Are there any other things you'd like us to know about her? Really, some things that impress me are that she influenced the Sisters of St. Joseph to continue to become active and work in the deaf community. And in the church newsletter, when they mention religious ed, her name was mentioned along with the other sisters. So I feel that she probably taught them sign language, and they already knew a little bit of French sign language. So she had a way of influencing people to join in her service, in her mission. I really appreciate you being here and taking the time with me. Bless you. Thank you.